So the property that we're headed to right now was a property that my grandmother and father purchased as a investment property. And this was in the 1980s.
Cleo Davis is an artist in Portland, Oregon, and he's driving me to see a house in the historically black neighborhood of Albina. It's a house that tells an important story, not just for Cleo, but for all of America. Cleo pulled into a street in a quiet residential neighborhood with leafy trees. We got out of the car and arrived at a property with two buildings, a large house to our right and a small house in the back. Cleo told us that when his grandparents purchased the property in 1982, the lot with the larger house contained an even larger 7-unit apartment building. Cleo picked up the story where he'd left off.
So in 82, that was also the time of the blight and nuisance ordinances. So you redline, disinvest, no funds can come into the community, and you are not allowed to get insurance. So now you're perpetuating what folks would legally termed as blight. So now that it's blighted, you get what's called a red tag. So that's really what happened to this property here. Once you get red tagged, good luck trying to get out of it.
Cleo's grandmother went to the city council to petition the orders to demolish the buildings on her property that had been red tagged. The council decided to let the smaller building remain, even though, according to Cleo, it was the one in worse shape.
That's almost the plight of black folks in this country. There's a lot of unnecessary dealings, you know.
Yeah, I can tell you're still you can still feel it. I can hear it in your voice a little bit. It's still a painful memory, obviously.
Yeah, and it's like, it's not just us, though, you know? So many other families have this similar story.
Yeah.
And may not have the documentation to show it, or everything got demolished and they had to move.
In the end, the Davises lost a structure, but they were able to keep their property and stay in the neighborhood. In the 80s and 90s, they witnessed the worst years of disinvestment and drugs. But then in the 2000s, things started to radically change in Albina. This neighborhood, I mean, the houses are big. It looks like a pretty well-to-do neighborhood.
Well, it is now.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, you know, this thing is $1 million, right?
Really? Wow.
But all of this used to be black folks.
I see a local church here on the right.
Yeah, white folks bought that. Used to be a black church.
Right, of course.
But now it's like Airbnb or something.
Oh my God, no, really?
I'm telling you, Portland is crazy.
But for Cleo, nothing epitomizes the craziness more than Williams Avenue. Back in the 40s, when Albina was a predominantly black community, Williams was the main thoroughfare. As we were walking, Cleo would point down to the sidewalk from time to time, showing me an art project that he and his wife had completed. Plaques embedded in the concrete that tell the story of the black businesses that were there before.
This is Dr. Unthink, one of the first black doctors in Portland. A lot of the buildings got taken down in the 80s and 90s through the blight, just like what happened with the 7-unit apartment building.
Cleo led us past busy restaurants, fancy grocery stores, and even a hipster barbershop.
This is all new. In like 10 years, less than 10 years. It didn't always look like this. It wasn't always like this. So when I'm working on this street every day, I started to hate the street. The rents are high. And the whole legacy is being stolen. This was our street, and then you're walking down the street and the folks are looking at you like, what you doing here?
Right.
What are you doing here?
But I just imagine like a future development where black owners can feel that they're still taking advantage of the growth and the prosperity that's being accumulated without at the same time necessarily feeling like it's no longer their own. Like there is a way forward to have both of those.
There is. So here's the thing. We have to create new economic development models.
Yeah. Cleo's right. And Portland isn't the only city in the U.S. that's struggling with the issues of equitable growth, especially in historically black neighborhoods.
But the way cities try to mitigate the harms of gentrification today is often by constraining development. Things like setting aside certain buildings or certain units for affordable housing, or requiring developers to pay community benefits as compensation for building market rate apartments.
But what if, instead, residents could benefit from development and thus benefit from their neighborhood's growth?
And what if they could even have a say in what gets built, whether they're homeowners or not?
Welcome to City of the Future, a podcast from Sidewalk Labs that explores the ideas and innovations that could transform cities. We're your hosts. I'm Vanessa Quirk.
And I'm Eric Jaffe. And in this episode, we're building off of our previous episode, From Owing to Owning, and looking at new models for building generational wealth that go beyond home ownership.
These are innovations that could not just help folks participate in and benefit from their community's growth, but that could even expand our very concept of wealth.
And potentially even begin to redress some of the racial inequities that have been baked into our housing system for decades.
The top 5% of earners in the country, what does their asset mix look like? It's all over the place. It's cash in the bank, it's stocks, it's bonds, it's portfolio investments, it's houses. And then you look at more working class person that's a renter, and it's savings, and that's about it.
That's Marc Norman, who you may remember from our previous episode.
Marc's an associate professor of practice at the University of Michigan and the faculty director of the Weiser Center for Real Estate.
As someone who's worked in affordable housing for years, Marc understands that low-income families are rarely thinking about diversifying their assets. At best, they're working towards the dream of owning a home. But often, they're just trying to get by.
But while homeownership is a valuable goal, there are downsides to it, especially if it's your only means of wealth. As Marc pointed out, it's not advantageous to have all of your wealth locked up in one single investment. Homeownership also limits your mobility, making it hard to move if you get a better job elsewhere.
But Marc told me about a wealth-building model that's even more decoupled from an asset that you own. It's called a neighborhood REIT.
A REIT.
Right.
The Real Estate Investment Trust is a well-established, long-standing way of raising capital for real estate development of all kinds, office, commercial, residential. And that model typically has large-scale firms buying assets.
So with REITs, a company buys income-generating real estate all across the country on behalf of their investors. And REITs, they've been around and popular with investors since the 80s. But neighborhood REITs, those are brand new. The idea is, rather than have your real estate assets all over the country, why not have them all based in the same neighborhood or district so that the investments all benefit one community?
The notion of a neighborhood REIT is having investments that aren't purely looking for profit, but that are somehow creating a community benefit, and also thinking very thoughtfully about what they're investing in and how they exit those investments. So they might take small dollar investments. It might be from people that own buildings in the neighborhood or even renters. So a much smaller dollar, more hands-on notion of real estate investment.
So unlike a traditional REIT, which is really a tool for pro-investors, just about anyone can afford shares in a neighborhood REIT. And that way, when the development takes off and the value goes up, the investor would earn income.
Right. And it can include folks who don't live in the neighborhood at all. I mean, it's kind of a big deal. It's giving people a seat at the development table.
And so that's very different, right? If I have a share in an investment vehicle, it means that I can have a say in what that vehicle invests in.
Okay, it definitely sounds compelling. And I can see how neighborhood REITs differ from community investment trusts. Like we learned about in the last episode from John and Jonas, the CITs allow people to collectively own a commercial building. But the neighborhood REIT model is all about having community members invest side by side with professional investors, hopefully piggybacking off of and even benefiting from their expertise.
Right, which from the developer perspective is quite compelling, and that matters because for a model like this to work, developers have to see themselves participating in something like this over the long term.
But I'm assuming there are downsides to this model. I mean, is a REIT always right?
How long were you sitting on that one?
It just came to me.
Yeah, okay, all right, sure. But yes, to answer your question, there can be downsides with neighborhood REITs. First, there are a lot of questions that you have to sort out when it comes to decision making. Like, how much say does an individual small dollar investor get in the neighborhood REIT's decisions versus how much say should a big dollar investor get?
Right. Finding that balance, it's super tricky.
Absolutely. And the second drawback is risk. Even though you're investing in many buildings throughout the neighborhood and diversifying your asset mix in that way, you're still putting your eggs in one neighborhood basket.
Right. So it's not quite as diversified a model as the original traditional REIT model, where you have assets all over the country.
Exactly. And then the last drawback is scale. You need a big project, a significant amount of upfront capital, and, a willingness to commit a lot of time and money to make a neighborhood REIT work.
They're regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. So you need to be accredited, you need to be certified, you need lawyers. It's not for the faint of heart or people that don't already have capital to start it up. So that's why they're relatively rare.
That all makes sense, but one question I still have is, do these neighborhood REITs make sense for developers? Is there enough in it for them to take a chance on trying something like this out?
That's still a really big unknown. But if the developers have upfront capital, if their project has scale and all the qualities that you normally need for growth, things like transit access, proximity to anchor institutions, demand for housing, then a neighborhood REIT should be a good bet, and it should increase in value over time.
And I guess another potential upside for the developer is you'd be embarking on a project where, at least in theory, you should have the community strongly behind you, because they're actually going to benefit from the growth your development will bring. And of course, that's not to say that something like the neighborhood REIT is a silver bullet for community engagement and community alignment or affordability, but it is a really exciting new approach that, when combined with other initiatives, could really help folks generate wealth without needing to own a home.
Agreed. And while neighborhood REITs might not be super popular yet, they are starting to pop up in places. Sidewalk Labs invested in a startup called Nico, which became the first SEC-certified neighborhood REIT in 2020. And, in fact, Marc told me about another exciting neighborhood REIT that's just starting to take shape.
Where's that?
Right where we started this episode, in Albina.
There have been many attempts to redevelop it over the years.
Because it's kind of valuable real estate, I would imagine.
94 undeveloped acres in the central city, adjacent to public transit, on one of the most beautiful rivers of the West, within walking distance of jobs in the central city. Yeah.
I met Rukaiyah Adams on a cold, cloudy day in Lower Albina, about a 30-minute walk south from Williams Avenue, where I met Cleo.
And before I forget, and since there's no cars, would you mind introducing yourself, who you are, what you do?
Sure. My name is Rukaiyah Adams. I am the board chair of the Albina Vision Trust. I'm a fourth-generation Black Portlander, and I carry with me a lot of history about this place.
Rukaiyah, who is an asset manager, left Portland many years ago, but she came back in 2011 for what she thought would be a short vacation. 10 years later, she's still here. And along with her colleagues at the Albina Vision Trust, she's on a mission.
So, high-level objective is to lead the redevelopment of Lower Albina, centering Black history and culture, and to create dense, affordable housing in the central city for a diverse community.
Back in the 1940s, Albina was a large district that encompassed Williams Avenue in the north and went down to the river on the south. But when the Federal Highway Administration decided to construct the I-5 in the 1950s, it did what it had done in African American communities across the United States. It leveraged eminent domain, the legal right of a government or government agency to seize private property for public use, and ran the highway right through Albina. Everything around the highway and to the south was demolished. So one part of the Albina vision was to is to restore the vibrancy of the community that once called Lower Albina home.
My great-grandmother, when she came from Shreveport, Louisiana, rented an apartment probably somewhere right in here, an attic apartment from a white family. And she, on her first day here, wrote in her Bible, which she used as a journal, "Dear God, I hope I've made the right choice in bringing my family to this place." And this would have been a time when in the American South, Emmett Till was murdered for, nothing really.
Yeah.
And this was a diverse, thriving community. It was also the jazz district in Portland, so it was lively and full of life.
Rukaiyah walked me through parking lots and over streets. And along the way, we passed by a huge 1950s modernist building of concrete and glass.
It's a beautiful building. So it's called the Veterans Memorial Coliseum. Basically, we destroyed the homes of black veterans like my grandfather to build a monument to white veterans here. And despite its beauty, there's a lot of pain. Yeah. And again, this was all homes.
And where did your grandfather go after it was demolished?
Pushed out of here in the 1950s. They moved a little north to a neighborhood where there's a hospital. They got pushed out of there in the 70s to the neighborhood where my grandparents bought a house. And in the 90s, the gentrification and displacement of black populations happened in that neighborhood, and they moved further out to the edges of the city. But it's been a 50-year intentional campaign to displace. And so what we're learning in the Albina Vision is that it's going to take a 50-year intentional effort to replace people. It won't happen in one shot.
Right.
It'll take me the better part of my life to restore the community that my great-grandfather and grandfather lived in, basically.
The first step toward restoring that community is to put forth a redevelopment plan that will make this neighborhood thrive and generate wealth. And they've got a lot of the ingredients that they'll need for growth. Tons of transit lines that run through the district, they're right across the bridge from downtown, and there's just tons of demand for housing in Portland, just tons.
And they have a lot of scale, right? I mean, 94 acres is pretty big.
Yeah, and it's big enough that Rukaiyah thinks that they should be able to do multiple developments on the site, including more traditional development projects like condos and hotels to bring in revenue, as well as more community-focused projects. But then the next step is to ensure that the wealth is accessible to both residents and to people whose ancestors once lived in the neighborhood. And that's why Rukaiyah and the Albina Vision Trust have been talking with Marc Norman to try and figure out if a neighborhood REIT could be one way of accomplishing that goal.
We've been experimenting for the last 2 years in forming an affordable housing REIT so that people can invest in REIT shares and participate in the upside of their community without having to buy an apartment. The challenge is that the people who were displaced here when we used eminent domain, we are not likely able to bring those same people back. But their children and grandchildren could be among them. There may be other new people who come to Portland who are of African American descent who have had similar experiences of displacement in other cities. We are trying to face that.
They're still working out the details, but the hope is that residents and families who were displaced and anyone interested in the growth of this neighborhood can put small dollars into the neighborhood REIT, benefit from the site's new development and growth, and then have a new source of income from this investment. So let's say that the granddaughter of a former Albina resident decides that she wants to be a part of the project. She spends $500 on a share of the Albina neighborhood REIT. Maybe she even votes on some of the developments that will go into the project, and then a few years later, a number of the development projects start to do well. Some retail buildings get leased up quickly, the hotel is doing great business, maybe an office building got sold for a fabulous little profit. So then she will earn money on her investment. So while the neighborhood REIT can't right all the wrongs of what happened here in Albina, Rukaiyah and the Albina Vision Trust are hoping that at least it's a step towards helping folks access the multi-generational wealth that they were denied.
So what are the next steps until this project comes to life?
So while the Albina Vision Trust has acquired some parcels of the site, they don't yet own all 94 acres.
Okay, that's not totally unusual for a really big development, but it's an issue.
It is. But in collaboration with the community, they've created a set of 6 principles. So any developer who comes onto the project will have to follow those principles if they want community buy-in.
But what about the capital, right? This is a big vision. They're going to need a lot of money.
Yeah, and I asked Rukaiyah about that too.
One big challenge is financial. I mean, I'll need to raise hundreds of millions of dollars to do this work.
It's a good thing you're really good at your job.
Yeah.
As we walked along the ridge with the shimmering skyline of downtown Portland behind us, I asked Rukaiyah if it can be a hard sell, asking investors to put money into a project that's new and innovative and community-oriented.
So now I'm gonna go heady on you,
Sure.
okay?
We're the City of Future podcast. We can go heady. It's cool.
Okay. I carry in me the same DNA that my ancestors who were enslaved have. I have the same brain, I have the same capability, I am the same. But in 400 years, we've gone from being objects of capital to being subjects in control of capital. And I'm one of those people. I've made that jump in one generation. I have something to say about it. I know what it feels like to be downstream of some of the decisions that investors make. So I'm hyper aware of it. But in the same ways that we've destroyed communities with capital and capitalism, I believe we can actually rebuild them. So that's the kind of spinning in my mind. Like, how can we use wealth to be healing rather than extractive and destructive?
It's like a longer term approach rather than like short-term gain.
That's exactly right. So I think of myself as a 1,000-year investor. And that in me, again, is the DNA of my ancestors from 500 years ago. And I imagine that 500 years from now, there'll be some girl thinking about these ideas. And I don't want to betray her. I don't want to disappoint her.
Well, I'm inspired.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been thinking about this conversation with Rukaiyah ever since we talked. And what they're trying to do with Albina Vision, it really is cutting edge. It's not just the neighborhood REIT either, by the way. It's every aspect, from the community engagement to the design. And they're actively working with developers who are on board and ready to put in the work to make the vision happen.
If they're successful, this really could be an important new model for development in the U.S. I mean, this is a new way for people to access multi-generational wealth. It doesn't require locking up all your savings into one asset, like a home. And that's a big mental and cultural shift for us.
Totally. And I'm thinking back to Cleo Davis, too, right? Who we heard at the top of the show, because, he does own property in Upper Albina, and yet he no longer feels like he belongs in his own neighborhood. But with Albina Vision, he and his family could be investors in the future of this entire neighborhood, and they'd have a say in that future. So they'd generate wealth, but without losing that sense of belonging.
Wait, we never heard the end of Cleo's story, did we? I mean, what happened to his family's property?
Oh, you're right. Okay, so to refresh your memories, we left Cleo and his family after the 7-unit building on their property had been demolished. And that lot sat vacant for decades, throughout the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s, as the neighborhood changed around them. Then one day in 2018, Cleo was walking to the City of Portland archives, where he was doing research at the time, when he noticed a commotion happening down his block. People were up in arms about an 1864 Victorian building known as the Mayo House that was in danger of being demolished. So Cleo called up the city and he said, "Hey, I have an empty lot nearby." But he wasn't just offering to save the house. He was asking for a zoning change so that he and his wife could turn this house into something more. A cultural center and a public archive where people could learn about the discrimination that had occurred to his family and countless other Black families like theirs.
Wow, that's really powerful.
It is, and Cleo and his wife are working with a local architect and design students to reimagine this building as a monument to the neighborhood's Black history and future. But since they first started imagining what that archive could be, they've also learned about and gotten involved with Albina Vision. And Cleo's hopeful that Albina Vision will be the greatest monument to Black creativity and prosperity that the neighborhood could have.
The vision itself is monumental. It's one of the first times that I know of in the history of Portland, and maybe even in the United States, where really we have an organization that is thinking in advance within the next 50 years of what our community and what investments, and looking at policy and shifting these things in order to have a vibrant Black community. Albina Vision isn't just the hope of the Black community here in Portland. I think it's going to change things, how we do things in the country.
Thank you for listening to City of the Future, a podcast from Sidewalk Labs. Your hosts are Vanessa Quirk and me, Eric Jaffe. A big thanks to all the guests who made this episode possible: Cleo Davis, Marc Norman, and Rukaiyah Adams.
Thank you to Allison Novak, Jesse Shapens, and Crystal Dean from Sidewalk's development team. And a special hat tip to former Sidewalker Annie Koo. Thanks also to our producer, Guglielmo Mattioli, our advisor, Benjamin Walker, and our mixer, Andrew Calloway.
Story editing was by Rough Cut Collective. Our music is by Adam James Levin Arity of Lost Amsterdam. Our social media and transcripts are by Jamie Lee Hogland. And our art is by the great Tim Cow. We'll see you in the future.